Alexa, clear notifications.
Delete all your notifications, right?
Yes.
Okay, deleted your notifications.
That way it won't give me the notification sound effect while I'm recording. Thank you. Hello, Planeswalkers! Andrew here, bringing you another deck tech. My birthday's coming up in a couple of days, on the 16th of May, so I wanted to do one of my favorite decks. Today, we're going over my first true commander deck, the Locust God. This deck was originally a Niv Mizzet deck when I first started playing the game, but as soon as I discovered the Locust God, I knew I wanted to switch the deck over to him. The Locust God is a 4/4 legendary god for 4 blue-red with flying, and whenever you draw a card, you create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. He also lets you pay 2 blue-red to draw a card and then discard a card, and also has the Forgotten God clause of Amonkhet that says if he dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. This means you should never have to pay commander tax for this massive insect. If you're not already familiar with the way that this deck plays, it's packed full of draw spells that enable you to create an insane amount of 1/1 insects and overwhelm your foes with a swarm. I'd like to make these deck techs about what is the best version of the deck in my opinion. And not to toot my own horn, but I'm going to do exactly that, and say that my in-paper version of this deck is very close to the most optimal build of the Locust God. I did make a few alterations for the deck tech, and it could certainly benefit from 1 or 2 more upgrades, but this deck is pretty strong in its current form. Without further ado, let's get into what little mana ramp this deck has, given that we're not in green. We have Mana Rocks in Arcane Signet, Firemind Vessel, Izzet Signet, and Soul Ring. We also have Neheb, Dreadhorde Champion, which is a 5/4 zombie Minotaur warrior with trample. But he also says that whenever he deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you may discard any number of cards, and if you do, draw that many cards, and then add that much red mana. He also prevents the mana that he generates from being lost this turn as phases end. Our next block of cards is our card draw, and being the focus of our deck, is what we have almost the most of. The non-creature permanents in this category are Skullclamp, Bident of Thassa, Folio Fancies, the Magic Mirror, and Heuristic Study. Skullclamp can be equipped to one of our insects to kill it and draw us 2 cards, replacing that insect with 2 more as long as Locust God is on the board. Bident of Thassa says you may draw a card whenever one of your creatures deals combat damage to a player. Folio Fancies removes our hand limit, and you can pay twice X into it to make everyone draw X cards. Magic Mirror also removes your hand limit, and has you put a knowledge counter on it at the start of each of your upkeeps, then draw a card for each knowledge counter on it. Heuristic Study is a classic that says whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless they pay 1 mana. The creatures in this category are Consecrated Sphinx, Nezahal Primal Tide, and Gadwick the Wizened. Constipated Sphinx says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Nezahal cannot be countered and removes your hand limit, and whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card. Finally, Gadwick costs X blue blue blue, and when he enters, you draw X cards. The rest of our card draw strategy is made up of instants and sorceries. These are Brainstorm, Echo of Aeons, Finale of Revelation, Invoke the Firemind, Ponder, Tamiyo's Epiphany, Windfall, and Winged Words. Brainstorm lets you draw 3 cards and then put any 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. Echo of Aeons has every player shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7 cards. This card also has Flashback, and it's one way of resetting our library if we go too deep into our deck. Finale of Revelation is an X-cost sorcery that lets you draw X cards, and if X is 10 or more, you instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Regardless of what you pay for X, Finale of Revelation is exiled after it resolves. This card is extremely powerful if you have enough mana to pump into it. Invoke the Firemind is another X-cost card that says you either draw X cards or deal X damage to target creature or player. Ponder lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, then put them back in any order. You may choose to shuffle your library, and either way you draw a card afterwards. Pull from Tomorrow costs X blue, and you draw X cards, then discard a card. Tamio's Epiphany has you scry 4, then draw 2 cards. Windfall has each player discard their hand, then everyone draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way. Finally, we have Winged Words, which costs 1 less if you control a creature with flying, which of course, with Locust God and his insects, we probably will, and simply lets you draw 2 cards. Next up are our aggressive cards, that either allow us to deal more damage or do something disruptive to our opponents. Our creatures in this category are Agent of Treachery, Cavalier of Flames, Psychosis Crawler, Torbran, Tromokratus, and Perforos, God of the Forge. Agent of Treachery steals a permanent an opponent controls, and Cavalier of Flame lets you discard any number of cards and then draw that many on entry, and you can also pay into him to pump your board. Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are both equal to the number of cards in your hand, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Torbran says whenever a red source you control would deal damage to something, it deals that much plus 2 instead. Tromokratus is an 8/8 with hexproof unless it's attacking or blocking, and it cannot be blocked unless every creature defending player controls blocks it. Attack with Tromokratus and an army of insects, and even if your opponent has flyers, they're still forced to choose either to take 8 damage from Tromokratus and block your insects, or block and most likely kill Tromokratus and take the hits from the insects. Perforos, God of the Forge, deals 2 damage to each opponent whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control. We have some damaging spells in this category as well, including Impact Tremors, Lightning Bolt, Beacon Bolt, and Rawl's Outburst. Impact Tremors is a mini Perforos effect, Lightning Bolt hits something for 3, Beacon Bolt hits a target for damage equal to the number of instants and sorceries you control in Exile and Graveyard, and Rawl's Outburst deals 3 damage to any target, and lets you look at the top 2 cards of your library and put 1 into your hand and the other into the graveyard. We've also got a few cards that make our insects hit harder, and these are Cavalcade of Calamity, Hall of Triumph, and Icon of Ancestry. Cavalcade says whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade deals 1 damage to the target that creature is attacking. Hall of Triumph has you choose a color when it enters, and boosts all creatures of that color by +1/+1. Icon of Ancestry is the same effect, except it has you choose a creature type when it enters instead of a color. Nextly is our set of defense cards. These include our counterspells, like, well, Counterspell, as well as Didn't Say Please and Negate. Force of Negation counters a non-creature spell, and then exiles it, and we can also pay for it by exiling a blue spell from our hand instead of paying its mana cost, if we play it on an opponent's turn. Izzet Charm can counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, or it could deal 2 damage to a creature, or have you draw 2 and then discard 2. We pack 1 removal spell in Unsummon, although our damaging spells can technically also be used as removal. Bolt Bend and Lazadette Plating protect us and our permanents, with Bolt Bend costing 3 less if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, and lets you change the target of a spell or ability with a single target. And Lazadette Plating has you amass 1, and then you and permanents you control gain hexproof for the turn. I really thought card draw was my largest category, but no, support is. I think this is mostly due to the fact that the support category is full of numerous different effects that all generally help our strategy. Our creatures here include Bloodwater Entity, Hypersonic Dragon, and Keranos, God of Storms. Bloodwater Entity gets +1/+1 for the turn whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and when it enters, it recovers an instant or sorcery from your grave to the top of your library. Hypersonic Dragon lets you cast sorceries at instant speed, and Keranos lets you reveal the first card you draw each turn. And if it's a land, you draw another card. If you reveal anything other than a land, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. We also run both Niv-Mizzet Draco Genius and the Firemind. Draco Genius draws you a card whenever it deals damage to a player, and you can pay into him to deal 1 damage to a creature or player. Firemind says whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to a creature or player. Additionally, we run Snapcaster Mage and Snapcaster Mage. Hang on, wait, no, that's wrong. Additionally, we run Snapcaster Mage and Spark Double. Snapcaster has Flash, and when he enters, he gives an instant or sorcery in your graveyard flashback for the turn, where its flashback cost is its mana cost. Spark Double becomes a non-legendary copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, with an additional +1/+1 or loyalty counter. Sage of the Falls is a deceptively fun card that says whenever it or another non-human creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card, then discard a card. You play the Locust God and Impact Tremors, then play Sage of the Falls. You draw a card and Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent when Sage of the Falls enters. You discard a card to finish up Sage of the Falls' effect, then make an insect from drawing the card. The insect enters, triggering both Impact Tremors and Sage of the Falls, in a loop of drawing and discarding cards, making insects and hitting your opponents with Impact Tremors. This loop only lasts for as long as you have cards in your deck, but since it's a May effect, you can stop it at any time. But let's be honest, it's pretty likely that you'll have more cards in your library than the highest life total among your enemies. We're not done with support just yet. Oh no, we got a few more to go. We have Clear the Mind, which puts your graveyard back into your library and draws you a card. Commence the Endgame can't be countered and has us amass X, where X is the number of cards in hand. Fraying Sanity is an enchantment that goes onto a player, and says that at the start of their end step, they put the top X cards from their deck into their graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into their graveyard from anywhere this turn. Future Sight has us play with the top card of our library revealed, and we may play the top card of our library as if it was a part of our hand. Helm of the Host is an artifact equipment that makes a non-legendary copy of the equipped creature at the start of combat, allowing us to clone the Locust God every turn. Mirari lets us pay 3 to copy an instant or sorcery we cast, and Mystic Retrieval returns an instant or sorcery from our grave to our hand, and it also has flashback. We also run Repeated Reverberation, which lets you copy a spell twice. Our Planeswalkers are sorted into this strategy, those being Rahl Izzet Viceroy, Rahl Storm Conduit, and the Royal Scions. Izzet Viceroy lets us grab cards, zap something, and makes an emblem that deals 4 damage to anything, and lets you draw 2 cards whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. Storm Conduit lets us scry, and can copy our spells, which, because of his passive effect, deals an extra damage to anything. The Royal Scions let us draw cards, buff 1 creature for the turn, or draw you 4 cards and zap something. To wrap up our deck, we have our land base, which is made up of Cascade Bluffs, Castle Vantress, Gateway Plaza, Izzet Boilerworks, Izzet Guildgate, Mystic Sanctuary, Reliquary Tower, and Swiftwater Cliffs. We also run 17 islands and 11 mountains. Okay, so this deck can maybe be improved with more than just a couple of cards, like I stated at the start. But I stand by this build of the deck being very powerful. It's one of my favorite decks to play, and it does a lot of fun stuff. Well, only fun stuff for the person piloting it. Anyways, what do you think of this deck build? Are there any cards you would add or cut? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, leave us a like, and maybe throw a sub our way. Thanks for watching, Planeswalkers. See you later!